guys, it's Manna, and welcome to Alternative Unicorn, a show on YouTube where I discuss spirituality, mental health, and airy-fairy new age stuff. Today on Alternative Unicorn, I want to go ahead and talk about some mental health stuff. Specifically today, I would really like to venture into something that is very important to me, and today I would like to talk about PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. I was diagnosed with PTSD when I was 17 years old. Now, I'm not going to go into excessive detail as to what gave me PTSD, but I have been battling with it since before I was 17. I just wasn't correctly diagnosed until that time, and I've been diagnosed 2 more times since then. There were incidences in my life, multiple incidences, and that have led to this disorder. And now that I'm 31, that's far past 17, I do feel like I have a better grapple on things. I've been through therapy, I've done group therapy, I've done lots of different therapies and modalities to address this. And since I am at a really comfortable place with myself and my disorder, I feel like it's important to share it with you and to talk about this today, because even though people have heard of it and know what it is, we mostly associate it with veterans, and while that is incredibly common and very true, it does happen to people that aren't just veterans. So let's get into it and explore what it is, how we take care of it, and kind of some of the things that we face day to day. So what is PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder? This can happen to anyone that has suffered a traumatic event. So it is common to hear it amongst veterans, people who've been in war zones, because there's a lot of life-threatening situations in war, unfortunately, and a lot of times people will experience these and they bring PTSD back with them as a result of some of the horrible things that they've seen and were exposed to in a war zone. Similar to traumatic events like war, other things that can bring on PTSD is a traumatic event in your young life, in your early childhood years, and it can happen as an adult. So it can be from something as getting in a traumatic accident where your life was almost lost, seeing somebody else in a traumatic accident, or witnessing something traumatic happening to someone else, neglect, rape, sexual abuse, years and years of violence or abuse to yourself. These are some of the common things that bring on PTSD in a person of any age. It can happen to men, women, children, adults. It really doesn't pick its victims. And so I kind of want to talk about who gets it. Why do some people have PTSD and some people don't, especially in war? Not all veterans have PTSD, and that's a really important thing to understand and to see. There are a lot of factors that are involved into why a person might develop PTSD and why someone doesn't. It can be anything from their upbringing, from their childhood, if it's a re-traumatization of something, if they have a history of mental illness, if they suffered with depression, or their brains just function differently. And this is an important thing to talk about, the science side of PTSD. What is it and how does it happen? And so a way that a therapist has explained to me with my PTSD is that my fear sensors are broken, is the kind of the perfect and most layman's way to explain it. If we have the way that we look at the government and with the way that we look at emergency whatever things, and if this color is the worst one and this is green is good, a person with PTSD, and not all of them, but a person with PTSD might start off, their base level might start off in an orange or in a zone that is already heightened. So when a fearful situation comes in, or something that might not even be a dangerous situation, our brains with PTSD don't always process stuff properly or appropriately to what the fear rate actually is. So I can be in a scenario that is very triggering for me, and there's so many things to talk about. When we use the word trigger in the PTSD community, trigger specifically means an incident, a word, or something that stimulates the part of our brain that turns our fight or flight on into the bad zone. That's a trigger. So there are things that I can experience as an adult, even though my rational brain can say, oh, this isn't a dangerous situation. If it's repetitive or likened to the traumatic event that I have experienced before, it will automatically wire my brain higher than an average person into saying that that situation is not safe for me. And the unsafeness and how I behave after my brain goes into that period of not being safe is the thing that caused it. That is a trigger. So people are using the word trigger a lot these days to kind of talk about not feeling good or feeling uncomfortable or it hurts your feelings. That's not what trigger really is in the psychological community. Trigger in the psychological community, especially if you're a person with PTSD, a trigger means the thing that sends your fear gauge over the safety of what normal operation is, and it causes us to physically respond, emotionally and mentally respond in ways that are out of our control. So when I use the word trigger, I don't use it loosely, I don't use it vaguely. It's really specific and like saying that's a trigger for me. I have to stay away from that, because once I subject myself to a trigger that I haven't faced and haven't gotten over, haven't worked through, I kind of get to this place to where there is no going back, and I kind of fall into an automated response. Because what happens with PTSD, your brain has actually been rewired to not calculate fear appropriately. And this is my most recent therapist. That's kind of the way he explained it to my partner, to help him understand that I can't assess situations the way other people would because of the traumatic events that I had experienced. So, some of the common symptoms of PTSD is what we call replays. This can be in the form of dreams or actual in your physical life where you replay the traumatic event over and over. Replays are really common closer to the time of the incident and not as much often later in life. It's been a long time now. I don't have reoccurrences anymore, except for when I'm in a trigger time. Sometimes I'll get like those visual flashes of that thing over and over again. Sleeping disorders or sleeping problems, it could be as not sleeping. You have violent dreams that where you wake up and you still feel like you're in that area. So with war veterans, a really common side effect in PTSD in war veterans is that they will wake from their sleep as if they're in a battle zone. And it's really hard, and it's really hard for their families. It's really hard for them to not know they're not in that danger zone, because it feels like it in your body. Everything neurological that's happening is telling you that the situation is real and you are in danger. And so that's probably the biggest side effect of PTSD, is that it doesn't allow you to assess danger appropriately, because what might be going on isn't the way that it feels to you, or sometimes what you see. So disassociation is also really common in severe cases where you can not be aware of where you are, not be able to see what's actually going on, or you don't remember things that happened. So memory problems is also really common with PTSD, not remembering events until later or at all. Distorted feelings, so anxiety, depression, feelings of worthlessness, loss of interest. You can fall into deep depressions or deep anxiety. And PTSD is categorized as an anxiety disorder because it most commonly creates anxious thoughts, which are repetitive, fast thoughts that are usually of the negative nature. Some of the things when I was at the peak of my PTSD, it was suicidal thoughts, it was the world exploding, it was just death, tragedy, just lots of terrible stuff. And I could have had a really, really good day, and it didn't matter because my brain was processing things in through like this fear filter that everything was dangerous. So then of course my brain and my central nervous system all complied with that fear, that thought of danger, that what my brain was doing. So my heart would race, my body would go cold, I would sweat, I couldn't breathe. These are really common symptoms of a person that has PTSD. Now, everything that I'm saying in here is not necessarily like, this is it and this is the only instance. I am talking as a person with PTSD, and I'm talking about my personal experiences. There are people with lots of other experiences out there. But the point of this is to start a dialogue and to remove some of this negative conversation about PTSD, and some of the stigma that it doesn't happen to everyday people. It happens to everyday people all the time. A lot of people experience traumatic events, and some people unfortunately experience them multiple times in their life, and it's hard, and it's hard to cope with it. So let's get into some of the coping skills or coping mechanisms or way that we treat PTSD. One of the ways that we treat that they, psychologists and professionals, treat PTSD is absolutely therapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is very popular among the PTSD community because cognitive behavioral therapy is based off of the school of thought of reprogramming the brain and how we function. And so it's not really in that realm of like, let's talk about our feelings. It's really functional in the sense that it takes A and B and connects it to C, or black and white, and turns it into other things. And it was very helpful for me to do cognitive behavioral therapy. It doesn't work on everybody, but I was younger when I did cognitive behavioral therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy gave me my coping skills. Group therapy also helped me a lot as a young person, just because of the loneliness and the depression and guilt feelings that come along with having PTSD. It's really common to feel guilty for having it, and it's so bizarre that we do feel so guilty for having it because there's really nothing we can do about it. We weren't born with it. Life happened and we reacted, and that's kind of how it is. So group therapy helped me just to be able to find other people that I could talk to about it and not feel so crazy, because the crazy feelings is really what gets you down and gets you depressed. Second thing is learning your triggers, identifying them, and being able to appropriately communicate with the people in your life what they are, how to stay away from them. And the last thing is educate yourself about your disorder. I thought that reading books about PTSD or panic attack disorder was going to make me feel worse, that it was going to make me feel like a statistic. It was totally the opposite. If anything, it confirmed for me, you're not crazy. Here's why. It's like, when you educate yourself on the issue that you go through, it's as if you destigmatize yourself from being a crazy person. And not having conversations about it is what makes people so ashamed and so afraid to talk. And talking it out, sharing our stuff, and being able to communicate it is one of the best ways that we can create a new and healthy lifestyle for us when you do have PTSD. If the people around you don't understand what you're going through, can't support you in it, you continuously feel crazy and feel like you can't have relationships, that you can't have friendships, that you're always going to be this leper, and it's not the case. Medications are very helpful for a lot of people. I did take medication early on to help me cope, and medication is what helped me kind of explore my triggers in a safe environment, so I wasn't always getting escalated, and I wasn't peaking into the tipping point of my anxiety. So I did have medications for about a year early on in my therapies, and then I went off of them, and I've been on naturopathic meds ever since. That was my personal experience with it. That was my personal journey. Everybody needs something different. And I am lucky enough to have been through some of the things that I went through, several traumatic events. It wasn't just one thing. To be able to go through therapy, have supportive friends and family members that understood what I was going through and treated me with that kind of respect and understanding, into figuring out what worked for my own life, incorporating new tactics into my life that helped me cope better and helped me function better. And now I'm an adult, and I still struggle with it. I still really struggle with it. A really common thing is not being able to get up and going, and you feel worthless and depressed, and there's not a lot of reason behind it other than your PTSD. And it's hard to talk yourself out of the fact that it's not real, because as far as your brain is concerned, it is real. And I think what I want to take away from this video is that if you suffer from PTSD or panic attack disorder or a different type of anxiety disorders, because anxiety disorders kind of fall all into that same realm of why they happen, and they all treat us really similarly. It's anxiety disorders. I think one of the things that I would like for you to take away from it is the conversation that if you could have snapped out of it, you would have. And it's the same way that we look at anybody with any kind of disease or disorder. So it's like, and I'm not equating PTSD or anxiety disorders with alcoholism, but I'm saying socially in the stigma. If you look at an alcoholic and we say, just stop, if they didn't have alcoholism, they could just stop. I'm not an alcoholic, so I can say no to alcohol. It's not a big deal. But an alcoholic's ability to say no to alcohol is a lot harder because they have a disease, they have an illness, and their wiring in their brain is different in regards to how they deal with different substances. Now, when you have an anxiety disorder or you have PTSD and you have a traumatic event running in your life, think about it in the same way. If you could just snap out of it, don't you think you would have by now? It's been my entire life. I would love nothing more than to not have a million crazy thoughts or to get ridiculously afraid standing on a street corner by myself and nothing is in my way. Like, I don't know why. So getting myself out of the mindset that I should just be able to think differently it doesn't serve me personally, and it serves me better to face my PTSD and to face my panic attack disorder and to look at it in the eyes and say, you have this, you deal with this, and you filter the world a little bit differently. So what are we going to do now to get you to the place of being functioning? That's how I deal with myself. I'm not telling you to do that, but that's been really helpful for me. Telling me to not be something that I am doesn't work. It doesn't work for anybody. So yeah, just keep going, seek help, find what works for you, explore different areas, take this into your hands, find your community of support. You are not alone. There are millions of us like you out there, and we want to help each other and support each other because everybody deserves the opportunity to have a healthy and stable life, regardless of some of the terrible things that you might have gone through. Work on them. They're workable. There are different steps and all kinds of new therapies, all kinds of new things working for this disease every single day. There's lots of education out there, lots of literature. Educate yourself, get to know yourself, and don't be afraid to look at what you went through. But I definitely recommend you go through it with a professional and not alone, because it really does help us not do too much too fast. This is a long haul. It's a marathon. It's not a race. It's your life. Every day matters, every step matters, and there is no end point. So do what feels good for today. Try to get yourself through it. And there are lots of people out there to support you. Thanks so much for watching this weird little educational video on PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment if you have PTSD or you suffered from an anxiety disorder. And you just want to talk about it, leave me a comment. Let's get in a conversation. Light and love, guys. Good night.